Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. So, have you ever had to consult with an expert of any kind, and it turns out they're a narcissistic person? What do? Let's take that on. Listen, we have obviously talked about on this channel the important narcissistic people in your life over and over and over again. Parents, partners, adult children, extended family, people you work with. But what about when the narcissistic person is someone you need because they have a certain expertise? This could be a doctor who may be a specialist in some sort of illness or other health problem you're experiencing. It could be your child's teacher. It could be a person who may be working on your house, a contractor, a plumber, that sort of person. It could be an advisor of some kind, an accountant or lawyer, that kind of role. Could be a therapist. It could also be someone who is a crucial gatekeeper. For example, someone who's like a mortgage lending agent or other loan officer, or someone who's going to make a big decision in your life, right? It could be a person that you need to sign off on an application for something that you're going in for and that you need approval for. You can add whomever else you think belongs on this list of sort of expert people that you may have to turn to at times. So these are people you're probably not going to be friends with, or certainly not necessarily friends with, that you're hiring to do something or consulting with, that you may have chosen because they are really good at what they do. In the case of gatekeepers, for example, you may think that they could get you the best loan rate or something. These experts, some of them may be technically some of the best at what they do. And you want that expertise, especially if it's a critical matter, like your health or the health of someone close to you. So again, you want their expertise, and you're thinking, meh, I don't need to be their friend. As long as they can come up with the best thing, the best treatment, the best advice, install the best bookcase, build the best house, I just need them to do the best job. When we talk about the narcissistic expert, as it were, it's a nuanced conversation. It's always going to be difficult because all narcissistic relationships are, but it varies depending on a few issues. And the first is, how much time do you have to spend with this person, with this expert? If this is a one and done, you're going in to get a piece of information, you know you're getting technically sound advice or guidance, and you're confident based on this person's expertise and history, it's good guidance. And then you may take that information and use it someplace else and never have to deal with them again. It may make for one terrible day or a terrible series of steps to have to get the appointment, and you swallow it and you deal with it and you get the information and you pay your bill and you leave. And you may think, heaven above, I hope I never have to talk with that person again. They're an absolutely horrible person. But for example, I don't know, let's say it's like a second opinion from a medical professional. And they, based on tremendous knowledge, tremendous confidence, they give the opinion. But it was absolutely a terrible, cold, icky encounter. But you were able, again, to take that information and use it to your advantage. The less time you have to spend with the narcissistic expert, the less unpleasant and harmful it can be for you. But all of that depends on number two. And the second thing, in terms of the impact of a narcissistic expert on you, is how silenced or how safe do you feel? Now, this will relate to stuff like trauma bonding and trauma response. For some folks, when you're in the face of a person who is domineering or controlling or imperious or very powerful, or in some cases even gaslighting you, you're very likely to freeze. And as a result, you may not ask further clarifying questions. So even though this person is so knowledgeable and expert, you may not even get the full benefit of this expert because you're flooded with that din, that feeling overwhelmed, or even being triggered, that sense that all those things can result in. As a result, even if you have to only see this person once, you may not only not get much out of it because you feel frozen and flooded, but you may afterwards experience regret and self-blame for not speaking up, for not asking questions. You may leave an encounter like this not even sure how you benefited, without the full range of information you could have received, feeling exhausted and depleted and sick because of having such a toxic encounter, and also carrying a burden of self-shame for not being able to stand up. A hack you can have in these situations is, if you're having to deal with a really icky expert, ask if you can record it under the pretense so you can have the notes later. And it's not even a pretense. You can then get the notes and get the information out of it, or have someone else with you who may not be affected the same way by this toxic person and may be more willing to ask the questions. Anything so you can at least get what you need out of this person, despite how terrible it leaves you feeling, or that sense of freezing. The third thing you can ask is, how interpersonal is this sort of relationship with this expert? And this relates to the first thing I said. Some of these relationships with experts they don't feel relationshipy. In fact, they're the expert. They're almost like a living web page that you get some information from. But in this case, the website then screams at you. The more this relationship with this expert has a bit of an ongoing interpersonal piece to it, for example, your child's teacher or child's coach or your therapist, then the more that this relationship can powerfully and problematically impact you. The focus here is on experts, and in many cases, I'd say in most cases with experts, there may not be that much of an ongoing relationship, but when there is, and the stuff of relationships like empathy or compassion matters, a person who's in an expertise role, that's a real problem. So that rolls into the idea, this fourth idea, of you have to ask, how are other people affected by this expert? Most survivors of narcissistic relationships struggle when people around them are hurt, more than when you yourself are hurt. So this so-called expert may be interacting with someone close to you, or weighing in or impacting their lives. For example, like a teacher or a pediatrician or a nurse or a caregiver for a family member or a doctor weighing in on a loved one's health. The impact of a narcissistic person expert would be far worse if they're interacting with someone you care about rather than just you. And then you have to deal with the expert. You may sort of feel doubly affected. Except, and this is when it gets interesting, you might be willing to take the expert on head on if they're being terrible, if you feel like you're protecting someone else. You may initially feel that usual sense of freezing and being depleted, but the empathy and compassion you have for this other person in your life that you're consulting the expert about may result in you being willing to call out that narcissistic expert. I give us the example that my mom struggled with a major health issue during the pandemic, and I spent many, many hours in hospitals and clinics. And while I'd say the vast majority of nurses and other healthcare professionals we dealt with were absolute saints and angels, we had to deal with a few narcissistic ones, and that did not feel good. But I was almost willing to go to blows for her. I am not so sure, had it been me myself, I don't know that I would have had the spirit for it. So there's a difference. A fifth thing to keep in mind when you think about the narcissistic expert is, do you, just no matter what their expertise is, do you actually trust them? If there's an expert who's supposed to be really good at something, you want to trust them. And when I think of some of the narcissistic experts out there I know, and endured a lot of it because I did trust their knowledge and ability, right? You put up with a lot from them. And in many cases, their guidance was spot on. So the trust meant that I would turn to them again because I knew I needed what they had. But when I knew I was going to have to interact with them by email or phone or in person, I avoided it. I procrastinated, I'd postpone, I'd try to avoid it in any manner just to avoid having to interact with them. But then, The moment would come, almost like taking a bitter pill, and I would do it. I'd get the information from them and get out. And I'd feel like crap afterwards. And if I did really need to interact with them more than just an email, I would just almost like plug my nose, make the call, get in there and get out. And their narcissism and putting up with their narcissism felt sort of like the price of admission for their information, right? Something I had to endure, any of us would have to endure, and ultimately hopefully get what we need. However, over time, I have to say in my own life, I've traded up. I've left doctors that have invalidated me. I was willing to wait 9 months to get an appointment with a more compassionate doctor. I chose an accountant that is so sweet and kind that I actually look forward to our annual tax meeting. But I know that it's not always an option. And sometimes the expertise is about life or death, and that expert is very narcissistic, and we will endure anything to get it. And it may be worth it in the long term, but on the day you're doing it, not so nice. A sixth thing to ask yourself is, do you feel heard? A key issue to keep in mind with narcissistic experts is that you're often not heard. After all, they have all the answers, right? So you will tell them something, and they will just say what they'll say. Narcissistic health professionals may engage in medical gaslighting. They may sort of minimize your symptoms or even sort of play it down to the point where they tell you your symptoms are in your head, or might paint you out as someone who has something else going on. In fact, when it comes to narcissistic experts, especially medical experts, it is much better to have them review records and data rather than having a chat with them, since they may enjoy the intellectual puzzle of your lab results, but would be rather dismissive of you if you were sitting in front of them and sharing your concerns and your feelings. By and large, narcissistic experts do not listen well. So even if they're the best at what they do, if they aren't hearing your question, how much can they really help you? The seventh thing you really want to think about is this expert worth it? And that is the million-dollar question, or more, depending on the expert you're talking about. Sometimes, yes. The information they have, the knowledge, it may be necessary for a larger goal of yours. So it may require contextualizing it, radical acceptance, seeing it clearly, not allowing yourself to justify their arrogant conduct, for example. But getting what you need and getting out, it's like having to stick your hand in a gross puddle, like to fish out your keys or some money you dropped. It's gross, but you got to get your keys to drive home, right? And the odds of running into a narcissistic expert or one day needing one, it's not small. Narcissistic folks are often very smart because they're often laser focused on what it is they do, and they can do it really well. The grandiosity and the validation seeking plays a role in that. So the horror is that the very best person to get guidance from is obviously going to be a very smart one, and their arrogance is what drove that. So now you got to put up with the interpersonal ickiness, that's getting your keys out of the icky puddle, so you can get what you need and get out. If, however, you aren't asking this person questions, this expert questions, because you keep freezing or you feel uncomfortable or they feel inaccessible to you, and you feel so bad afterwards, maybe it's not worth it. We can often get pulled into that whole cult of reputation, but they're the best, maybe. But there's no one best person at anything in the world. Best is, maybe they have the best knowledge base or really great knowledge base, but how they deliver it matters. And you may be able to find another attorney or doctor or plumber or hair color person, one that doesn't disrespect you or treat you with contempt. And if indeed the stakes are high and the information is hiding behind, you have to go through a narcissistic person to get it, you may need at times to just plug your nose and go in. But pay attention to whether you are indeed getting what you need, given what an obstacle course it is to get there. I know in my case, I once recall working with a very horrific narcissistic real estate agent. He was an absolutely awful, awful person. But the house we were trying to sell, he sold it for a price higher than the other agents thought was even possible. And I learned from that. Sure, it was nice to get the price, but it was an absolutely wretched experience. And I never used him again. And I steered other people away from him. The same with someone who was supposed to help me with a loan many years ago. He literally screamed at me and called me names. Ironically, when I went to find another lending agent, I found another screaming at that game. Maybe people who sell loans load heavily on narcissism. I don't know. I turned to a referral. I remember in another situation I had gotten for an agent to represent a book I was writing, and he told me, meh, I'm not sure how well your book's going to do. No one's ever heard of you. I found someone else who did the deal. But once that happens once, I don't use the person again. And I let other people know to avoid them too. All of us have to remember, with 7 billion people in the world, there's always bound to be someone else, another expert, where you can get information and not walk out feeling shredded. And one last thing to throw in there, I wanted to take a moment to let you know something exciting, at least to me, hopefully for you. I have a new book coming out in February called It's Not You. It's available for pre-order now. Please click the link in the video description to check it out. Would love to have you get it. Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.